Russia is advancing through the occupied territories in Ukraine, with all its destructive power and the accompaniment of peculiar soldiers. They are the armed forces of North Korea that joined the ranks of Vladimir Putin in an effort to finish off the West. The corpses left in their wake do not only carry the Ukrainian flag, but one with stars and stripes. This can only mean that Kyiv has finally received the fearsome troops of the United States. In addition to the shipments of weapons and economic support, Joe Biden and Volodymyr Zelensky added highly trained men in battle. Now the invaded country is defended by the greatest military power in the world, and the war has just reached an unimaginable level. Deaths are multiplying and cities are burning in flames. This is simply the beginning of a bloody conflict that could break out if the Americans and North Koreans enter the conflict between neighbors. Clearly, none of this has happened, but at Military Force, we will analyze the possibilities of it happening, the increase in tensions that could cause it, and what the result of a confrontation with all these actors would be. Are you ready? Because here we go.
I don't know if you guys know what this is behind me. That's a Russian tank. Russian tank that was taken out. Welcome to America!
What we have just seen is an American soldier who has decided to get involved in the war between Russia and Ukraine as a volunteer. His case is like that of many other combatants who have taken part in this conflict that began on February 24, 2022, after Moscow decided to invade its neighboring country with the excuse of defending pro-Russian communities from extreme nationalist groups. But the fact that this U.S. soldier had the initiative to reach Ukrainian territory and join the defense of the different cities does not mean that the nations that became allies of Kyiv are sending troops to war, since that would mean being decidedly part of the conflict. It is precisely this that generates concern about how much the conflict can escalate globally, since if a military power like the Americans entered the battle, it would force many partners to join. Meanwhile, on the other side, the most powerful enemies of the West could appear, such as China joining the Russians. With billions of dollars in military equipment sent to Ukraine by Washington and other NATO members so far, the line on participation is too thin, and that is why a large number of nations are rushing to reach a peace agreement. A Kyiv-backed international summit brought together more than 100 countries and organizations in mid-June 2024, with the goal of building support for Zelensky's vision, which calls for a peaceful withdrawal of Russian troops from Ukrainian territory. However, Putin was quick to reject those efforts before offering his own conditions for peace, which include the withdrawal of local forces from 4 regions partially occupied by Moscow, and for Kyiv to give up its bid to join NATO, a feat that Ukraine and its allies consider impossible. The two positions are far apart, and there seems to be no option but to fight until the opponent is defeated on the field. But the Ukrainians know that it is very difficult to achieve such a victory without help. In response, the Russian leader publicly warned anyone thinking of joining the conflict.
Он не пытался помешать нам, а тем более создать угрозы для нашей страны, для нашего народа, должны знать, что ответ России будет незамедлительным и приведет вас к таким последствиям, с которыми вы в своей истории еще никогда не сталкивались. Мы готовы к любому развитию событий. Уверен, что преданные своей стране солдаты и офицеры вооруженных сил России профессионально и мужественно исполнят свой долг.
What is striking is that despite criticizing and threatening countries that have provided aid to Ukraine, Russia is also receiving support. After an intense period of attacks in which much of its arsenal was decimated, the amount of war material used by the Kremlin, but manufactured elsewhere, has grown. One example that has been seen a lot is that of the Iranian Shahed 136 drones, responsible for ferocious bombings. However, it has not been the only case. In January 2024, a young Ukrainian weapons inspector named Kristina Kimachuk learned that an unusual-looking missile had crashed into a building in the city of Kharkiv. She began calling her contacts in the military, desperate to analyze it. Within a week, she had the fragments of the projectile in front of her in a safe place in the capital. She began to take it apart and photograph each piece, including the screws and computer chips that were smaller than her fingernails. Almost immediately, she realized it wasn't a Russian missile, but she had to prove it. Hidden amid the mess of metal and wires, Kimachuk saw a small symbol from the Korean alphabet. Then she came across a more telling detail. The number 112 had been stamped into parts of the casing. This corresponds to the year 2023 on the North Korean calendar. That was how she realized she was looking at the first hard evidence that her enemies were using North Korean weapons to attack the country. We had heard that they had delivered some weapons to Russia, but I was able to see them, touch them, and investigate them like no one had been able to before. It was very exciting, she said. Since then, the Ukrainian military says Russia has fired dozens of missiles from the Asian country towards its territory. They also claim that they have killed at least 24 people and injured more than 70. Despite all the recent rumors that North Korean leader Kim Jong-un is preparing to start a nuclear war, the most immediate threat now is the ability of this nation to fuel existing wars and global instability, especially since it has openly expressed its alliance with Russia and its support for this conflict.
세계 전략적 안정과 균형을 유지하는 데서 강력한 러시아 연방이 맡고 있는 중요한 사명과 역할에 대해서 평가하며 자기 주권과 안전 이익, 평화안정을 수호하기 위하여 우크라이나에서 이 특수군사 작전을 수행하고 있는 러시아 정부와 원대한 인민의 투쟁에 전적인 지지와 굳은 연대를 생각하십니다.
From the other side of the world, U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin told U.S. lawmakers that North Korean supplies of ammunition and missiles, as well as Iranian drones, had allowed Russian forces to get back on their feet after suffering heavy losses in battle. According to reports released by American allies in Asia, between August 2023 and February 2024, Pyongyang sent around 6,700 containers to Russia, which could hold around 3,152mm artillery shells, or more than 500,000 122mm multiple rocket launcher shells. These are capable of causing enormous damage to sensitive infrastructure on Ukrainian soil and causing a large number of casualties to continue the Russian plan of conquest. While both Moscow and authorities in North Korea have denied such arms transfers, even calling them absurd, in the United States they are taken for granted. This could be reason enough for Washington to decide to intervene with its soldiers to restore order on the battlefield and wipe out Putin's men. But before reaching that point, they prefer to exhaust all the stages.
DPRK providing ammunition and weapons to Russia that's been able to help them perpetuate their illegal and unprovoked war against the Ukrainian people. So it's something that we're going to continue to keep an eye on. I would say though, taking a step back, our focus when it comes to the Indo-Pacific region and the Korean Peninsula is on working with allies and partners to promote peace, stability, and security in the region, and that will continue to be our focus.
What Pentagon spokesman Pat Ryder means is that, beyond having certainties about the use of North Korean weapons for the conflict on Ukrainian soil, the United States intends for everything to remain the same, without further intervention on its part. However, a historic visit by Vladimir Putin could change everything. The Russian president landed in North Korea in June 2024, which was his first trip to the country since 2000, when he met with Kim Jong-il, the current leader's father. This unusual visit after more than 2 decades is a clear sign of the deep alignment of the two countries and Moscow's need to obtain weapons support from Pyongyang to sustain its intervention in Ukraine. Although North Korea is one of the most impoverished societies in the world, it has one asset that has facilitated the blossoming friendship between Putin and Kim Jong-un: military equipment. When they met in the Russian city of Vladivostok, the two agreed to a deal whereby Russia would share technological know-how to help the North Korean space program in exchange for munitions and weapons for use in war. While the Kremlin has called reports of this deal absurd, evidence of ballistic missiles being used at different Ukrainian positions has put an end to the mystery. Now, weapons aside, Korea has a lucrative human resource export industry, with workers sent abroad to earn much-needed hard currency for the regime. Russia does not seem to be an exception, and that is why its officials have discussed the possibility of advancing political agreements to employ between 20,000 and 50,000 people. This would not be a novelty, as in 2022 the Russian ambassador to Pyongyang, Alexander Matsagora, said that North Koreans could be deployed to rebuild infrastructure in occupied regions of Ukraine. And that could just be the excuse to get them to the spot and then put a rifle in their hands, ready to kill the enemy. Suddenly, the Kremlin could add a necessary and loyal ally to a battle that not only looks towards its neighbor, but also towards the entire West.
Россию и КНДР многие десятилетия связывает прочная дружба и тесное добрососедство. Взаимодействие между нашими странами основано на принципах равноправия, взаимного уважения, интересов друг друга. Высоко ценим последовательную и неизменную поддержку вами российской политики, в том числе на украинском направлении, имея в виду нашу борьбу с навязанной на протяжении десятилетий гегемонистской политики со стороны империалистической политики со стороны Соединенных Штатов и их сателлитов в отношении Российской Федерации.
As we have seen, one of the alliances is practically ready to fight on the battlefield. That is why it is time to analyze the situation of its opponents and thus find out who will emerge victorious. For a long time, Vladimir Zelensky has expressed the need for his country to receive international support to confront the Russian invasion. The one who led this campaign from the first moment was the United States, which invested billions in military aid and called on other allies to contribute with key weapons for the fight. A new urgent request from the Ukrainian president for additional air defense systems to protect his territory from the Kremlin's bombings again received a response from the Americans. Joe Biden promised to make arrangements for the delivery of 5 Patriots, one of the best American-made anti-aircraft systems. But also, at the annual G7 summit held in Italy, the president called on the countries that are part of this international political forum to strengthen Ukraine's deterrence capabilities. In this way, the United States and European countries agreed to use the interest and revenue from sanctions against Moscow for the invasion to provide a new $50 billion loan package for Kiev. As reported, Ukraine will be able to spend the money in several areas, including military, economic, humanitarian, and reconstruction needs. However, that is not all. Biden and Zelensky also signed a 10-year security pact, which includes a commitment by the United States to work with Congress on a sustainable source of funding for the future. This is how the American president praised his Ukrainian counterpart and gave his full support.
And the way you've stood holding on to Kharkiv, and you've proven once again the people of Ukraine cannot and will never be overtaken. And I assure you, the United States is going to stand with you. I've said that all during this debate. I continue to say it. The United States is standing with you. You are the bulwark against the aggression that's taking place. We have an obligation to be there. And so I'm looking forward to having a detailed discussion with you about where we go from here.
However, the agreement does not yet directly commit U.S. troops to defending Ukraine against Russia. That is a red line drawn by Biden, who does not want his country to be drawn into a direct conflict with Moscow, which has nuclear weapons. It seems that this is the limit of the Americans, who have also expressed their intention of a peaceful end to the war, beyond blaming the Kremlin for what happened.
The agreement that President Zelensky and I just signed also lays out our shared vision for a just peace, a peace rooted in the UN Charter and the principles of sovereignty and territorial integrity, a peace with a broad base of support around the world that holds Russia accountable for the damage it has done in this war.
Despite Biden's expressed vision, a peace agreement without a fight does not seem to be the closest solution to the conflict. So we wonder, what would happen if Russians and North Koreans began to fight together against Ukrainian forces? This action by Moscow would be the first step to find out what reaction the West may have, and if there were no response, it could also be understood as an invitation to continue pulling the string and build an ever-growing alliance to go after the United States. Faced with this, Washington will have to counterattack, and it will have no choice but to do so in a big way. With Russia's arsenal reduced after more than 2 years of war, North Korea's cooperation will serve to maintain the siege with bombings in several Ukrainian cities. The problem is that the Americans would arrive with many more anti-aircraft systems and a large amount of weaponry that will put their rivals on the defensive. The military technology of the United States is far superior to that of the Asians and could even defeat the Russian one, which has demonstrated several failures on the battlefield. An example of this is the loss of numerous tanks such as the T-90, presented among the best in the world, but falling to simple Ukrainian drones or missiles fired from the soldiers' shoulders. American troops will also be key. Some of the best prepared men on the planet and in perfect condition will face reserve fighters with little training who were thrown into battle after the great falls suffered by the Russian forces. Finally, Washington's invisible fighters and bombers would deliver the final blow. The Americans have the best stealth aircraft and will be able to attack strategic targets within Russian territory. By breaching this barrier, the war will be definitively lost for Vladimir Putin, who will have one last card to play: nuclear weapons. If Moscow decides to use intercontinental ballistic missiles, it could wipe out entire cities on the other side of the world, but the United States will quickly launch its own missiles. This is definitely a battle that no one will win. The damage would be incalculable, and the planet would never be the same again. Do you think that any of the opponents would dare to start a nuclear battle? In that case, who do you think would win? Now, after having learned about the possibilities of a conflict between both sides and leaving you this question so that you can share your opinion, it is time to say goodbye. Thank you very much for staying until the end. We hope that you will join us in the next video.